Are you a gel press or jelly plate beginner? I have 3 cards to share today and some do's and don'ts of gel press printing that I've learned along the way. Do experiment with the mediums that you have on hand. Don't feel like you need to go out and buy a bunch of supplies to start off with your gel press. Do use a small amount of paint. Don't use a lot of paint, otherwise your brayer is just going to slip and it's not going to rotate like it should because there won't be enough friction. Do clean your brayer on a scrap piece of paper in between colors. If you don't clean your brayer, the burnt sienna that you see here is going to overtake the buff titanium here. You're not going to be able to see the buff titanium. Do roll your brayer in one direction and lift your brayer after each stroke to ensure that you get a good blend and ensure that the paint completely covers the brayer surface. Do be creative with your scrap piece of paper to clean your brayer. Don't throw those scraps away because they end up being really pretty sometimes. If you make a mistake like this, don't panic. Do be open and loose with your creations. Here I have a small gel press on an acrylic block and a rubbing plate. Don't feel like you need to buy these things. Do look at the supplies you have on hand. If you don't have a small gel press, maybe use the back of a large solid stamp. Also look for textured items around your house. Bubble wrap that comes in packaging, plants from outside, leaves work great. Fabric, you can cut up old jeans and get texture with that. Do use soft items. Don't use any sharp objects that can damage the surface of the jelly plate or the gel press. At this point, I'm not even really sure what I'm doing. I didn't have a plan other than to lay down some paint and add some texture and see what I can do. If you're going for a layered look, do let the first layer of paint dry for about a minute before you put on the next coat of paint. Don't let this second coat of paint dry. Put your paper on immediately. You'll know you have the right amount of paint if you can see the first layer through the paint. It needs to be transparent, so thin that it's transparent. Do make sure you rub the surface completely. You can even let it sit for a few minutes and gently peel back the paper to reveal the print. This is a pretty good first print. I decided I wanted some more texture, so I added more of the buff titanium, and now I don't like it quite as much. I definitely got more texture, but it really dulled down that burnt sienna that I liked so much. Don't clean your gel press in between prints. Do leave that leftover paint on the plate so that you have more texture in the next print. Do use a contrasting color over the old paint so that you can see it. Don't use the same color, otherwise you won't see all of that great texture. Do use the small gel press or a stamp to transfer one color and pattern to another area. So here I've transferred the green and the white to the blue and vice versa. You can also transfer the stamped paint to another page or even your scrap paper to create a second print. I love pulling back the paper to reveal the print. Here you can see that burnt sienna up at the top and how that contrasts so nicely with the cobalt blue. So here I had leftover paint on this rubbing plate, and so I'm transferring that to the gel press. That is going to be the initial color, and then I'm going to add contrasting color to that, cleaning my brayer in between. There you can see I mixed the red and the buff titanium quite a bit, so you won't see much of the buff titanium. Here I have way too much yellow on the plate, and you could see that my brayer was slipping, so I'm having to roll off a lot of that yellow so that I can start to see the pattern underneath. Once you can see the pattern underneath and that top layer is transparent, you know you have the right amount of paint. So these are really pretty colors, but I really feel like this needed a lot more texture going on. The red just looked really bare up at the top. Do use your stamps with the gel press. You can use either red rubber stamps or clear stamps. Here I've inked it up with archival ink, and my ink pad is super dry, so you can see that it's not stamping all the way, which is totally fine because that's going to give it a distressed look. I did end up re-inking this pad later and got much better impressions the next time I pulled out my gel press. Again, I'll use a contrasting color, and in this case, a super bright yellowish green. And again, I have just a little bit too much paint, so I'm taking off the excess, and that's going onto my waste paper off to the side. And same for the other two colors as well. This time I'm using just titanium white, not buff titanium. So I'm going to do the same stamping. Now take a look at the amount of paint that's on the small gel press. There's a huge amount of paint buildup there, and I'm going to transfer that to this print in just a minute. Take a look at how the stamping turned out. It's got a great distressed look, but that yellow is way too bright. Do use just part of your gel press. You don't have to add paint to the entire gel press. You can just do a part of it. So just do a focus area. I wanted to cover up some of that yellowish green with a little bit of teal just to tone that back a little bit. Not a lot, it's still super bright. So next I'll use the round gel press and I'll stamp that on, and look at all that built up paint. It's like so dry. There's so many layers of dried paint on there. It's a super, super distressed look. Here you can see it in frame. Do use that technique to clean your gel press. Just add a thin layer of paint and pull one print to take it off. Do use a transition color. Here I felt like I needed one more color in between. And don't feel like you always have to completely press the paper down. You can lightly put it down or just partially put it down so that you get softer edges. Here I'm just using that archival ink to stamp directly onto the print. And I had some leftover paint here. I'm just checking to see if it was dry. You can see none of it pulled up. I have leftover paint on my brayer, so I'm adding that texture. And then I'm going to add a layer of white to this. And also a little bit of phthalo green. So you'll see as I am rolling this paint, I don't put enough in this lower left-hand corner. And because there's not enough paint, that left-hand corner is not going to pull off in the print. So you're going to see that. I'm going to use my stamp to actually create some negative stamping here. So I'm just stamping and removing the paint as I stamp. Do turn over your gel press so you can see what's going on. Don't take off that second acrylic sheet from the back of your gel press so that you're able to do this. And you can just peel the gel press back just like you peeled the paper back. Here you're going to see that area where I didn't put enough paint on it. See how it just doesn't even pull the paint at all. So if your paint is too dry, don't let your paint dry all the way if you're wanting to pull the print. Do make sure that your paint is still wet when you pull your print. But don't panic. I'm just going to add a little bit more of paint to that and we'll be able to pull that left corner right off. So I'm going to add white paint here. And I'm not worried about this being lined up at all. I'm just going to put the print back down and you can see that it pulled it and it's got a great distressed look. This actually ends up being my favorite print of the bunch. I love all that distressed layered look. I think those are really pretty colors too. Do use your smaller gel press as a way to pick up paint with your brayer. So I'm just putting the paint on the small gel press and then rolling the brayer through it so that I can get it onto this rubbing plate, and then I'm just stamping that on. Then I'll go ahead and use the paint that's on the small gel press and use that as a stamp. This is another one of my favorite prints from this session. So I wanted to add a little color to this, and so these are Caran d'Ache Neo Color pencils. These are new to me and I wanted to try them out. Don't feel like you need to buy a whole set of a new product to try it out. Do just buy it from the open stock. I just bought a couple colors so that I can try it out and see if I liked them before I make a major investment in a new product that I might not end up liking. I do like these a lot though, you guys. They're pretty cool. Okay, let's take a look at the prints. This, again, is my favorite one of the bunch. I love these colors together and I love the textures on that. This is my second favorite. I had some double stamping with the stamping, again, because my ink pad was so dry. So I do want to try and cover some of that up. I ended up putting white on top of that. I don't like how that looks, so I want to try and do something different to fix these two pages. What I opted to do was some heat embossing to cover up some of these areas that I didn't like. I haven't really heat embossed on prints like this before, so don't be afraid to experiment. I add a little bit of the embossing ink to this rubbing plate and press that on, kind of like a stamp. I wasn't sure if that was really going to work the way I wanted it to. There's a lot more embossing powder on there than what I anticipated. This is also a translucent powder, so I knew it wasn't going to have a ton of color. I'm not loving how that looked. That wasn't the look that I was going for, but that's okay. I'll just try something else. So here I added a little bit of that yellowish green paint to the small gel press. I'm going to stamp off some of that ink and we'll see if this was the look that I was going for. So that was better. That gives me just the positive area or the negative area. I can never tell what it is. But I didn't love this color. So that was the correct pattern. Like it didn't cover all of it, but I don't love this color. It looks great in one view. You can see that metallic, but it just kind of turned brown on top of the pink. So I'm going to try something else. We'll just keep trying until we get it right. So here I'm using less paint on the small gel press. You don't want to give up. Just keep trying until you get what you want. So just a tiny amount of paint. It's really pretty much dry. I'm going to sprinkle on some blue embossing powder. And I'll have all the supplies linked below. And there you can see I just got a partial pattern there. That's more of what I was looking for. More of that distressed look, partial printing. Covered up a lot of that white area. It adds a little more texture. Then I decided I would try the Ink Pad Refill Conditioner and Freestyle tool. This is a roller ball with the gel embossing ink in it. I'm going to sprinkle over some white embossing powder. Again, that I don't love, so I'm just going to distress it a little bit. It was a little too white compared to everything else. Everything else has color. There's not a lot of white on this. And so I just used some of that same cobalt acrylic paint and we're going to do a little fingerprinting, kind of distress that up a little bit. I'll add some in other areas. And then I decided to cover up this metallic embossing powder down here because I just didn't like how brown that got. And I'll add some white gesso down there as well. So I just kept finger painting. If you don't like what you have on there, you can wipe some off with a baby wipe while it's still wet. And here I have some gesso. I'm just going to cover this up with some white gesso and I'll keep working with this area until I like it. So don't quit, just keep trying different things, keep experimenting. It's just paper. The reality is I'm probably not going to use this entire page. So if I needed to cut this part off, I could, but I'm still learning. I still wanted to learn, and here is another mistake I'm about to make. So I pressed that texture into it, which was fine, but what I should have done is completely let the gesso dry. I didn't. So now I just have this big blue blob here. But that's okay. I'm still going to heat set it, and look how it crackled. So that I learned something. So if you put heat embossing over gesso, it's going to crackle, which is a pretty cool texture and effect. But I didn't want a huge blue blob. So I'm going to get that yellowish green paint again, and I'm going to stamp this on to get a little bit more of a pattern there. And now I'm happier with that. So it kind of brightened it up a little bit. It broke up that blue. I'll use the rest of the paint on here and just keep stamping. So we have loads of texture on this one. I don't love it. It's not my favorite, but I learned a lot with that one. So of course, then I decided to turn these into cards. I just ripped up some of the pages, and you can see that I die cut high out of that big blue blob area that we had, which broke that area up even further. So I have the dark blue high that's super textured, and then I have the negative space on the other side. If you want to draw on top of the acrylic surface, do use a pen that is good for non-porous surfaces. Don't use your regular journal pen or a regular Sakura Micron. What you would want to look for is an acrylic pen like the Posca pens, paint pens, or if you're wanting a black journal type pen, then I would recommend a Sakura micro perm pen or a Sakura Identi pen. Those are great for non-porous surfaces like this acrylic paint. They also work really well on Yupo paper and on top of alcohol ink. So I'm just adding some zentangle style leaves here. They're similar to the stamp set that I had used for this pattern. and it's just kind of like a ghost pattern. It adds just a little bit more texture because, I mean, really, we didn't have enough texture, but I just wanted to add it. Now here I decided to go with black because the pink was lighter, and this is a Sakura Identi pen. The Identi pen is pretty cool because it has two sizes. It has a fine tip on one side and then a broad tip on the other. It's still like a bullet nib, but it's great for zentangle because you can fill in large areas quickly with the larger nib. If you're enjoying the do's and don'ts of gel press printing for beginners, be sure to give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing down below. I also love to hear what you think, so leave me a comment. Did you learn something new in today's video? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you soon with more inspiration.